The dust rises like a living wall across the Syrian plains. Between 5,000 and 6,000 war chariots thunder toward each other, their wheels shaking the earth, their bronze armour glinting under the merciless sun of 1274 BC. This is the largest known chariot battle in history, and at its centre stands a young pharaoh, trapped, surrounded, abandoned by his own men, facing certain death. His name is Ramesses II. He is 30 years old, and he's about to fight for his life against an enemy that has already destroyed half his army. The Hittite Empire has laid the perfect trap. Their spies have deceived the Egyptians. Their chariots have smashed through the Egyptian lines like a bronze fist through papyrus. The pharaoh's camp is in chaos. His soldiers are running. The chariots of the enemy circle closer, tightening the noose around the god-king of Egypt. In minutes, he will be captured or killed, and the Egyptian empire will crumble. But Ramesses refuses to surrender. With only his personal bodyguard beside him, he makes a decision that will echo through 3,000 years of history. He charges directly into the Hittite army. Egyptian accounts would later portray this as one man against impossible odds, a divine champion facing down the enemy host. One desperate counterattack when all seemed lost. This is the Battle of Kadesh, the clash that will determine the fate of two superpowers, the struggle that will eventually lead to one of the oldest surviving peace treaties in history. The day when bronze met bronze on the banks of the Orontes River and the ancient world held its breath. What you are about to witness is not legend. It is not propaganda. It is the brutal truth of the largest chariot engagement ever fought, a truth written in dust, blood, and broken bronze on the killing fields of Syria. This is the story of how a young pharaoh gambled everything on a single charge, how deception turned the tide of empires, and how 5,000 chariots collided in a battle so massive, so violent, that its thunder can still be heard across the centuries. The trap has been sprung, the slaughter has begun, and Ramesses has nowhere left to run. Before we charge into this epic clash of empires, smash that like button like a Hittite chariot smashing through Egyptian lines. Subscribe to Wars in History and ring the bell so you never miss another journey into the most brutal battles ever fought. Drop a comment below telling us which ancient battle you want us to cover next. Your support keeps this channel alive, so let's make this video legendary together. Now, let's march to Kadesh. The year is 1274 BC. The Bronze Age is at its zenith. Great empires stretch across the ancient Near East, controlling trade routes that bring copper from Cyprus, tin from distant sources in the east, cedar from Lebanon, and gold from Nubia. These are the superpowers of their age, and they are about to collide. In the south, the Egyptian New Kingdom dominates the Nile Valley and reaches its imperial fingers into Canaan and Syria. The 19th dynasty sits on the throne, and its newest pharaoh is hungry for glory. His name is Ramesses II, Ramesses II, though history will call him Ramesses the Great. He is young, ambitious, and determined to surpass every pharaoh who came before him. He wears the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, but he wants more. He wants to secure Egyptian dominance over Syrian territories that have slipped from firm Egyptian control. He wants to restore Egyptian dominance over the Levant. He wants his name carved into history alongside the gods. In the north, the Hittite Empire spreads from central Anatolia down through Syria. Their capital, Hattusa, sits in the highlands of modern Turkey, protected by massive stone walls and governed by a warrior aristocracy. The Hittites are skilled in diplomacy and chariot warfare, and though later traditions credit them with early ironworking, the extent of any iron monopoly remains debated by scholars. Their king, Muwatalli II, is no young hothead. He is seasoned, calculating, and utterly ruthless. He has gathered allies from across the region, he has prepared his armies, and he knows exactly how to deal with an arrogant young pharaoh. Between these two empires lies a strategic prize, the city of Kadesh. Located on the Orontes River in what is now western Syria, Kadesh commands the trade routes between Egypt and Mesopotamia. Whoever controls Kadesh controls the flow of wealth through the region. The Hittites have taken it from Egyptian influence, and Ramesses wants it back, not through negotiation, not through tribute, through war. This is not just a battle for territory, this is a battle for supremacy, a test of military technology, tactical genius, and raw courage. Both sides are bringing the most devastating weapon of the Bronze Age, the war chariot. Fast, mobile, and deadly, chariots are the tanks of the ancient world. They carry archers who rain arrows down on infantry. They break enemy formations with shock charges. They dominate open battlefields. And at Kadesh, both empires will deploy them in numbers never seen before or since. The Egyptians will bring approximately 20,000 soldiers, organized into 4 divisions, each named after a god: Amun, Ra, Ta, and Seth. Each division contains infantry armed with spears, axes, and shields, alongside chariot squadrons crewed by Egypt's warrior elite. The Egyptian chariot is a marvel of engineering, light, fast, and agile. It carries 2 men, a driver who controls the horses and an archer who fires from a mobile platform. These chariots can wheel, turn, and strike with devastating speed. The Hittites will bring a comparable force, but their approach is different. The Hittite chariot is heavier, built to carry 3 men, a driver, a warrior armed with spears or javelins, and a shield bearer who protects the crew and adds weight for stability during charges. These chariots are designed not for hit-and-run tactics, but for sustained close combat. They are shock weapons meant to smash through enemy lines and grind them into dust. Both armies are marching toward Kadesh. Both commanders believe they will win, but only one of them knows the other is walking into a trap. The world of 1274 BC is interconnected in ways that would astonish us. Diplomatic letters fly between royal courts from Egypt to Babylon, from Hatti to Assyria. Kings address each other as brothers. They arrange marriages between their children. They send gifts of gold, horses, and slaves. But beneath this veneer of diplomacy, there is constant competition, constant tension, constant preparation for war. The collapse of the Mitanni kingdom has created a power vacuum in northern Syria. For generations, Mitanni served as a buffer state between Egypt and Hatti. But Hittite expansion has shattered Mitanni, and now the 2 great powers face each other directly. The question is no longer if they will fight, but when and where. Egypt has dominated the Levant since the conquest of Thutmose III over a century earlier. Egyptian garrisons hold key cities. Egyptian officials collect tribute. Egyptian trade ships carry grain, papyrus, and gold across the Mediterranean. But that dominance is slipping. Local rulers in Canaan and Syria are beginning to look north toward the Hittites instead of south toward Egypt. They sense weakness. They sense opportunity. The Hittites understand the game perfectly. They do not need to invade Egypt. They simply need to detach Syria and Canaan from Egyptian control. They offer alliances, protection, and trade deals. They position themselves as liberators rather than conquerors, and it is working. City after city shifts its allegiance. The Hittite sphere of influence creeps southward. Ramesses cannot allow this to continue. If he loses Syria, he loses prestige. If he loses prestige, he loses the loyalty of his own vassals. If he loses that, he loses everything. So he must strike. He must march north. He must restore Egyptian power through force, and he must do it quickly, decisively, and spectacularly. Ramesses II ascended to the throne in 1279 BC. He's now in his 5th year of rule, and he's obsessed with greatness. He has already begun a massive building program across Egypt. He has commissioned statues of himself that dwarf those of his predecessors. He has taken multiple wives to secure alliances and produce heirs. But none of this is enough. He needs military glory. He needs a victory that will prove he is not just a pharaoh, but a warrior king in the tradition of the great conquerors. Ramesses is charismatic, physically imposing, and supremely confident. He believes he is favoured by the gods. He believes his destiny is to expand Egypt's borders and crush its enemies. He believes that his youth is an advantage, not a weakness. But belief is not the same as wisdom. Ramesses has a limited battlefield experience. He has never commanded an army this large. He has never faced an enemy as cunning as Muwatalli. Muwatalli II has ruled the Hittite Empire for years. He is a veteran of diplomatic intrigue and military campaigns. He knows how to manage a coalition of allies. He knows how to choose ground. He knows how to exploit an enemy's overconfidence. Where Ramesses seeks glory, Muwatalli seeks victory. Where Ramesses believes in divine favour, Muwatalli believes in careful planning. And where Ramesses sees a straightforward conquest, Muwatalli sees an opportunity to destroy an entire Egyptian army. The clash between these two men is not just a clash of armies. It is a clash of philosophies. Ramesses represents the heroic ideal, the king who leads from the front, who trusts in his own strength, who believes that courage and divine support will overcome any obstacle. Muwatalli represents the strategic ideal, the king, who prepares, who deceives, who waits for the perfect moment to strike. One of these philosophies will triumph at Kadesh. The other will nearly die in the dust. The chariot is the defining weapon of late Bronze Age warfare, but not all chariots are created equal. The Egyptian and Hittite designs reflect fundamentally different tactical doctrines, and these differences will shape the entire battle. The Egyptian chariot is a masterpiece of lightweight construction. Its frame is made from bent wood, carefully shaped and lashed together with leather bindings. The wheels have 6 spokes, designed for speed and flexibility. The floor is woven from leather straps that absorb shock and reduce weight. The entire vehicle is built extremely light for speed and maneuverability. This makes it fast, agile, capable of rapid acceleration and tight turns. The crew consists of 2 men. The driver grips the reins and controls 2 horses bred for speed and endurance. The archer stands behind him, carrying a composite bow and a quiver of bronze-tipped arrows. The archer's job is to maneuver into range, loose arrows into enemy formations, and withdraw before the enemy can respond. Egyptian chariot tactics emphasize mobility, firepower, and disengagement. They strike like hornets, quick, painful, and gone before retaliation arrives. The Hittite chariot is built for a different purpose. It is heavier, with a sturdier frame and wheels designed for stability rather than speed. The floor is solid wood. The sides are reinforced. The entire vehicle is designed to carry 3 men instead of 2. The driver still controls the horses, but behind him stands a warrior armed with throwing spears and javelins, and behind him is a shield bearer who protects both men and adds weight to keep the chariot stable during close combat. Hittite chariot tactics emphasize shock and sustained melee. They do not hit and run. They charge directly into enemy formations, using their weight and the reach of their spears to break through. Once they penetrate, they grind forward, their shield bearers protecting them from counterattacks, while their warriors stab and slash at infantry caught in the crush. The Hittite chariot is not a mobile archery platform. It is a battering ram. Both designs have strengths and weaknesses. Egyptian chariots can outmaneuver Hittite chariots on open ground, but if caught in close combat, their lighter construction makes them vulnerable. Hittite chariots can smash through Egyptian lines, but they are slower to reposition and more difficult to disengage if the battle turns against them. At Kadesh, both types will be tested to destruction. In the spring of 1274 BC, the Egyptian army marches north from the delta. It is a sight that inspires awe and terror in equal measure. 20,000 men move in 4 massive columns, each division stretching for miles along the coastal road. The division of Amun leads, under the personal command of Ramesses himself. Behind them comes the division of Ra, then Tar, then Seth. Each division includes 5,000 men, infantry armed with bronze-tipped spears, shields covered in leather and wood, axes for close combat, and chariots that glitter in the sun. The infantry march in formation, their sandals raising clouds of dust that hang in the hot air. They carry their weapons and rations. They sing hymns to the gods. They believe they are marching to certain victory. Behind them come supply wagons loaded with grain, water, tents, and spare weapons. Behind those come servants, craftsmen, and camp followers. The army is a city on the move, and it takes weeks to reach the Syrian frontier. Ramesses has planned this campaign carefully. He intends to advance rapidly up the coast, securing Egyptian-held cities along the way, then turn inland toward Kadesh. Speed is essential. He wants to reach Kadesh before the Hittites can fully concentrate their forces. He wants to besiege the city, force its surrender and restore Egyptian control before Muwatalli can intervene. It is a sound plan. It should work. But it requires one critical assumption, that the Hittites are not already waiting for him. As the army crosses into Syria, Ramesses receives intelligence reports from scouts and local informants. The reports are reassuring. The Hittite army is far to the north, near Aleppo, more than 100 miles away. Muwatalli has not yet mobilized his full strength. Kadesh is vulnerable. If Ramesses moves quickly, he can take the city before the Hittites arrive. Everything is going according to plan, except that everything is a lie. As the division of Amun approaches Kadesh from the south, 2 Bedouin tribesmen are brought before Ramesses. They claim to be deserters from the Hittite army. They say they are members of the Shasu tribe, and they have grown tired of serving Muwatalli. They want to offer their allegiance to the mighty Pharaoh of Egypt, and they have valuable information. According to these Bedouins, the Hittite army is still far to the north. Muwatalli is afraid of Ramesses. He has heard of the Egyptian advance and has retreated to the district of Aleppo, keeping his forces out of reach. Kadesh is lightly defended. If Ramesses moves now, he can take the city without a fight. The Hittites will not dare to challenge him. This is exactly what Ramesses wants to hear. It confirms his intelligence reports. It validates his aggressive strategy. It proves that his reputation has preceded him and that the Hittites fear his power. He thanks the Bedouins and orders his army to press forward. The division of Amun continues toward Kadesh at speed. Behind them, the division of Ra follows. Further back, the divisions of Tar and Seth are still miles away, strung out along the march route. Ramesses does not question the Bedouin story. He does not consider that it might be too convenient, too perfectly aligned with his own assumptions. He does not wonder why these deserters found him so easily, or why their information is so detailed. He simply accepts it, and in doing so, he walks directly into Muwatalli's trap. The truth is that the entire Hittite army is hidden just behind Kadesh, concealed on the far side of the city, invisible to Egyptian scouts. The 2 Bedouins are not deserters. They are Hittite agents sent specifically to deceive the pharaoh. Their mission is to lure Ramesses forward with only part of his army, to separate his divisions, to make him overconfident and careless. And it is working perfectly. Believing the Hittites are 100 miles away, Ramesses advances boldly with the division of Amun. They cross the Orontes River and establish camp northwest of Kadesh. The camp is a standard Egyptian fortification, rectangular, surrounded by a shield wall formed from the soldiers' own shields locked together, with the pharaoh's tent at the centre. The chariots are parked in rows. The infantry stack their weapons. Servants begin preparing food. The men relax. They have marched hard and they believe they're safe. Behind them, the division of Rhea is still crossing the river. They are strung out along the march route, tired and disorganized. Further back, the divisions of Tar and Seth are miles away, still approaching from the south. The Egyptian army is not concentrated. It is divided, vulnerable, and completely unaware of the danger. As Ramesses settles into his camp, Egyptian scouts capture 2 more men near the river. These men are not Bedouins. They are Hittite soldiers, and when they are brought before the pharaoh, they are interrogated harshly. The temple reliefs that commemorate the battle show them being beaten with sticks, and under that beating, they break. They reveal the truth. The Hittite army is not near Aleppo. It is here, right now, hidden behind Kadesh. Muwatalli has assembled a massive force, chariots, infantry, and allies from across the region. They have been waiting for the Egyptians to separate their divisions. They have been waiting for Ramesses to make himself vulnerable, and now the trap is ready to spring. The pharaoh's confidence shatters. He realizes in a single horrifying moment that he has been deceived. His army is divided. His best troops are scattered along miles of the road, and a massive Hittite chariot force is about to hit him with everything they have. He shouts orders to his officers, send riders to warn the division of Ra, send messengers to hurry forward the divisions of Tar and Seth, prepare the camp for attack, but it is already too late. The Hittites are coming. Before we witness the Hittite storm about to descend on Ramesses, let's talk about a different kind of protection. Just like Ramesses needed intelligence and security, you need to protect your data online. That's where NordVPN comes in. NordVPN encrypts your internet connection, protects your personal information from hackers, and lets you browse the web securely from anywhere in the world. Whether you're researching ancient battles or just streaming your favorite content, NordVPN keeps you safe. Right now, you can get a massive discount on a 2-year plan plus 4 extra months free when you use our link in the description. Don't wait until it's too late. Protect yourself with NordVPN. Now, back to the slaughter. Muwatalli has positioned his forces with precision. Behind Kadesh, hidden from Egyptian scouts, stands the largest concentration of chariots ever assembled in human history. The Hittite coalition likely fielded between 2,500 and 3,700 chariots, supported by 40,000 infantry. These are not just Hittites. Muwatalli has called in allies from across his empire and beyond, contingents from Aleppo, Arzawa, Dardani, and a dozen smaller kingdoms. This is a coalition army, and it is massive. As the division of Amun settles into camp and the division of Ra marches unsuspectingly along the river, Muwatalli gives the order. The Hittite chariot force crosses the Orontes River south of Kadesh, hidden from the Egyptian camp by the terrain and the city itself. 2,500 chariots move in near silence, drivers controlling their horses carefully, warriors gripping their spears, shield bearers watching the flanks. They move into position like a bronze avalanche waiting to fall. Their target is not Ramesses' camp, not yet. Their target is the division of Ra, caught in the open, strung out along the march route, completely unprepared for combat. The Hittites have chosen their moment perfectly. The Ra division is tired from marching. Their chariots are not in formation. Their infantry are spread out. They have no idea what is about to hit them. The Hittite charge begins. 2,500 chariots surge forward like a bronze tidal wave. The ground shakes. The sound is indescribable. Thousands of hooves pounding the earth, wheels rattling over. Stone, warriors shouting battle cries in a dozen languages. The dust rises in thick clouds that block out the sun. The Egyptian soldiers of the Ra division look up from their march and see death coming for them. There is no time to form ranks. No time to ready weapons, no time even to understand what is happening. The Hittite chariots smash into the rear division like a hammer striking glass. The impact is total. Egyptian infantry are trampled under hooves and wheels. Spearmen are run down before they can plant their shields. Archers are crushed before they can draw their bows. The Egyptian chariots attempt to wheel into position, but they are outnumbered 5-1 and caught completely by surprise. The slaughter is absolute. The division of Ra ceases to exist as a fighting force within minutes. 5,000 men disintegrate into a panicked mob. Soldiers throw down their weapons and run. Officers scream orders that no one hears. Chariots overturn in the chaos. Horses break free from their traces and gallop wildly through the carnage. The Hittite chariots pursue without mercy, running down fleeing men, crushing anyone too slow to escape. The dust is so thick that visibility drops to yards. Soldiers cannot see their comrades. Officers cannot see their units. The world becomes a nightmare of dust, screaming, and sudden violence. Men stumble through the chaos and are killed by Hittites they never saw coming. The injured are trampled by friend and foe alike. The heat is overwhelming. The sun beating down, the exertion of combat, the suffocating dust filling lungs and throats. Some Egyptian chariots manage to fight back. Archers loose arrows into the dust, hoping to hit something. Drivers whip their horses, trying to outrun the heavier Hittite vehicles. But there is no formation, no coordination, no hope. The Ra division is not fighting. It is dying, and the survivors are running north directly toward Ramesses' camp. The Hittites do not stop. They drive forward, maintaining momentum, pushing the broken Ra division before them like cattle being driven to slaughter. The Hittite plan is working flawlessly. Not only have they destroyed one of Ramesses' 4 divisions, but they are using the survivors as a weapon. The fleeing Egyptians will crash into Ramesses' camp, bringing panic and chaos with them, and when the camp is in disarray, the Hittites will smash through and finish the job. Muwatalli watches from his command position. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned. The young pharaoh has been deceived, divided, and is about to be destroyed. Victory is minutes away. The first warning Ramesses receives is the sound. A low rumble that grows louder, like distant thunder that never stops. Then the dust cloud appears on the southern horizon, moving fast, too fast. Then the first fleeing soldiers burst into view. Egyptians from the Ra division, running in absolute terror, screaming warnings that make no sense. The camp erupts into chaos. Soldiers grab weapons. Officers shout contradictory orders. Servants and camp followers scatter in panic. The shield wall that surrounds the camp, carefully constructed, designed to protect against raiders, becomes a trap. The fleeing survivors from the Ra division crash into it like a human wave, trying to get inside, trying to find safety. They claw at the shields, pushing through gaps, trampling anyone in their way. And behind them come the Hittites. Through the dust, the Egyptian defenders see them, an endless line of chariots, 3 men to each vehicle, moving in disciplined formation. The Hittites do not pause. They smash directly into the camp's southern perimeter, exploiting the chaos created by the fleeing Ra division. The shield wall collapses. Hittite chariots pour through the breach. Inside the camp there is no battle line, no defensive formation, nothing but confusion and terror. Egyptian soldiers who moments ago were relaxing, eating, preparing for what they thought would be an easy siege, now find themselves fighting for their lives against an enemy that has appeared out of nowhere. Hittite warriors hurl spears from their chariots, killing Egyptians at close range. Shield bearers protect them from counterattacks. The 3-man crews work with brutal efficiency, grinding forward, leaving corpses in their wake. The division of Amun is being torn apart. Some units attempt to form defensive positions, but they are overwhelmed before they can organize. Chariots that were parked neatly in rows are now useless, their crews dead or scattered. Supply wagons burn, tents collapse. The entire camp becomes a killing ground. At the center of this nightmare stands Ramesses II, Pharaoh of Egypt, god-king of the 2 lands, 30 years old and about to die. His officers have fled. His soldiers are running. The enemy is everywhere. This is supposed to be impossible. Pharaohs do not lose. Gods do not fall. But the bronze spears of the Hittites do not care. About theology, Ramesses faces a choice. He can run, abandon his army, flee south and hope to escape with his life, or he can fight, and if he fights, he will almost certainly die. He chooses to fight. Around Ramesses stands his personal bodyguard, the Shurden. These men are not Egyptians. They are sea peoples, warriors from the Mediterranean who raided Egypt's coast earlier in Ramesses' reign. After defeating them, Ramesses did something unexpected. He recruited them. He recognized their skill, their ferocity, their absolute commitment to combat. Now they form his elite guard, and they are the only thing standing between the pharaoh and annihilation. The Shurden are distinctive. They wear horned helmets with a ball projecting from the centre. They carry round shields and long swords, early versions of the Nawa II sword, designed for slashing and thrusting. They do not break. They do not run. When the rest of the Egyptian army collapses, the Shurden form a tight circle around Ramesses and prepare to sell their lives dearly. The Hittite chariots circle the pharaoh's position, closing in from all sides. Spears fly. Arrows fall like rain. The Shurden shields absorb the impacts, but men begin to fall. The circle grows smaller. The situation is hopeless. Ramesses is surrounded, outnumbered, with no reinforcements and no escape route. This should be the end. This should be where the 19th dynasty dies in the dust of Syria. But Ramesses does not accept death. He is terrified. The Egyptian sources admit this, describing his desperation. His prayers to the god Amun for deliverance. But terror does not make him passive. Instead, it ignites something in him. A refusal to surrender. A determination to die fighting, if die he must. He grips his weapons, he shouts to his Shurden guards, and then he does something that will be remembered for 3,000 years. He charges. The Egyptian accounts of what happens next are dramatic, bordering on mythological. They describe Ramesses mounting his chariot, driving directly into the Hittite formations, cutting down enemies left and right, fighting with the strength of a god. The temple reliefs show him alone, surrounded by enemies, his bow drawn, arrows flying in all directions, corpses piling up around his chariot. Are these accounts exaggerated? Absolutely. Ramesses spent the rest of his 67-year reign commissioning propaganda about Kadesh, portraying himself as a lone hero who saved Egypt through personal valour. He was shameless in his self-promotion, but beneath the exaggeration there is a core of truth. Ramesses did lead a desperate counterattack. With his Shurden bodyguard and whatever chariots he could rally, he charged directly at the Hittite formations, trying to break through the encirclement. It was not heroism, it was desperation. But desperation can look like courage when it succeeds. The Egyptian chariots, lighter and faster than their Hittite counterparts, managed to punch through the Hittite lines at one point. The Hittites, confident in their numerical superiority, had begun to disperse, with some chariots breaking off to loot the Egyptian camp. This was a fatal mistake. It created gaps in their formation. And Ramesses, fighting for his life, found one of those gaps and drove his chariot straight through it. The breakthrough did not end the battle. The Hittites still vastly outnumbered the Egyptians. The camp was still overrun. The division of Amun was still shattered, but the pharaoh was alive, fighting, rallying what men he could find. And that meant the battle was not over. Just when the situation seems utterly hopeless, salvation appears from an unexpected direction. From the west, from the coast, comes a fresh Egyptian force, the Nearin. The origin and nature of the Nearin has been debated by historians for decades. Egyptian records mention them but provide few details. They were likely either Canaanite mercenaries or an Egyptian force that Ramesses had stationed on the coast to secure the port of Sumer. What matters is that they arrive at Kadesh at the critical moment, fresh, organised, and ready to fight. The Nearin hit the Hittites on the flank. The Hittite chariots, spread out looting the Egyptian camp and pursuing scattered Egyptian units, are caught off guard. Suddenly they face organised resistance from a new direction. The Nearin chariots charge into the Hittite formations, their archers loosing arrows, their drivers manoeuvring skillfully. The Hittite advantage begins to evaporate. Ramesses seizes the opportunity. With the pressure on his position relieved, he rallies the survivors of the Amun division. Egyptian soldiers who had been hiding, fleeing, or fighting in isolated pockets now see the pharaoh still standing, still fighting, and they return to the battle. Egyptian chariots regroup. Infantry reform their ranks. The slaughter becomes a fight. The Hittites, supremely confident just minutes ago, now face a deteriorating situation. Their formations are disrupted. Their chariots are scattered across the battlefield. Some are still in the Egyptian camp looting supplies. Others are pursuing fleeing Egyptians. Still others are engaged in chaotic melees with the Nearin. The coordinated assault has dissolved into a confused brawl. Muwatalli watches from his position behind Kadesh. He still has reserves, more chariots that have not yet entered the battle. He could commit them now, could push forward with everything he has and crush the Egyptians despite their resistance. But he hesitates. The battle is not going as planned. The Pharaoh is supposed to be dead or captured, but he is still fighting. The Egyptian army is supposed to be destroyed, but it is rallying. And committing his reserves means risking everything on a single final assault. Muwatalli makes a decision that will haunt him. He holds his reserves back. He allows the battle to continue without committing his full strength. And in doing so, he gives Ramesses the time he needs to survive. As the sun sets on the first day of battle, both armies pull back to lick their wounds. The Egyptian camp is partially overrun, but the Pharaoh still holds a defensive position. The Hittites control the field, but they have not achieved their objective of killing or capturing Ramesses. Casualties are massive on both sides. Thousands of corpses litter the battlefield. Wounded men scream through the night. The dust settles slowly, revealing the scale of the carnage. During the night, Egyptian reinforcements arrive. The division of Tar reaches the battlefield, exhausted from a forced march but intact. Their arrival dramatically shifts the balance. Ramesses now has enough men to hold his position and possibly counterattack. The Hittites, despite their numerical advantage, have lost their element of surprise. The trap has been sprung, but the prey has not been killed. The second day of the battle is less dramatic but equally brutal. It is primarily an infantry engagement. The surviving Egyptian divisions form defensive positions while Hittite infantry attempt to dislodge them. There are no more massive chariot charges, no more desperate cavalry melees. Instead, there is the grinding, exhausting work of Bronze Age infantry combat. Shield walls colliding, spears thrusting, axes chopping, men dying slowly in the heat and dust. Neither side gains a decisive advantage. The Egyptians hold their ground but cannot advance. The Hittites attack repeatedly but cannot break through. By nightfall of the second day, both armies are exhausted, depleted, and stalemated. Muwatalli faces a difficult reality. He has damaged the Egyptian army badly, but he has not destroyed it. Ramesses is still alive. Egyptian reinforcements are still arriving, and continuing the battle risks further losses with no guarantee of victory. Ramesses faces an equally difficult reality. He has survived, which in itself is remarkable, but he has not won. One of his 4 divisions has been shattered. His camp has been overrun. His supplies have been lost, and he is deep in enemy territory, far from reinforcements, facing an enemy that still outnumbers him. Continuing the battle risks total destruction. Both commanders reach the same conclusion. It is time to stop. In the aftermath of the battle, Ramesses withdraws. He does not flee in panic, but he does not press forward either. He marches his battered army south, back toward Egyptian territory, claiming that he has won a great victory. The temple inscriptions he will commission describe Kadesh as a triumph, a demonstration of pharaonic power, a moment when the gods themselves intervene to save their chosen king. The reality is more complicated. Ramesses did not take Kadesh. He did not defeat the Hittite army. He did not restore Egyptian control over Syria. By any objective measure, his campaign failed. He marched north with 20,000 men and 4 divisions. He returned with a shattered army and nothing to show for it except survival. But survival in this case is enough to claim victory. Ramesses survived when he should have died. He fought when he should have been captured. He rallied his army when it should have disintegrated, and he returned to Egypt alive, which meant he could control the narrative. The common soldiers who fought at Kadesh knew the truth. The officers who fled knew the truth. But the Egyptian people were told a story of heroism, divine favour, and triumph. And in the Bronze Age, controlling the story is almost as important as controlling the battlefield. Ramesses spent the rest of his extraordinarily long reign commissioning monuments to his victory at Kadesh. The battle is depicted on the walls of temples across Egypt, at Abu Simbel, at Karnak, at Luxor, at the Ramesseum. The inscriptions describe it in epic language, portraying Ramesses as a lone warrior god who defeated the Hittites through personal prowess. These inscriptions are propaganda, but they are also our primary source for the battle. We see Kadesh through Ramesses' eyes, and Ramesses desperately needed it to be a victory. Muwatalli also claimed victory. From the Hittite perspective, the battle was a success. They ambushed the Egyptian army. They shattered the Ra division. They overran the pharaoh's camp. They forced the Egyptians to retreat. They maintained control of Kadesh. They demonstrated that Egypt could not simply march into Syria and take what it wanted. These are the outcomes that matter. But the Hittites also failed to achieve their ultimate objective. They did not kill or capture Ramesses. They did not destroy the Egyptian army. They did not force Egypt to accept Hittite dominance, and they suffered significant casualties in the process. The battle was costly for both sides, and neither side gained a decisive strategic advantage. This creates a fascinating historical situation. Both empires claimed victory. Both commissioned propaganda celebrating their success, and both were, in a sense, telling the truth. Ramesses survived and returned to Egypt, which from an Egyptian perspective is a victory. Muwatalli controlled the battlefield and held Kadesh, which from a Hittite perspective is a victory. The Battle of Kadesh is not a clear triumph for either side. It is a stalemate fought at extraordinary cost. The immediate aftermath of the battle changes nothing. The strategic situation remains the same. Kadesh stays under Hittite control. The border between the Egyptian and Hittite spheres of influence remains contested. Both empires continue to compete for influence over the Syrian city-states. The massive Chariot battle solved nothing, but it did clarify something. It showed both empires that neither could simply destroy the other. Egypt could not march north and reclaim Syria through force. Hatti could not march south and conquer Egypt. They were evenly matched, and further warfare would simply bleed both sides without producing a winner. This realization, born from the dust and blood of Kadesh, would eventually lead to something unprecedented in the Bronze Age world: peace. For 15 years after Kadesh, the Egyptian and Hittite empires continue their Cold War. They compete for allies. They engage in border skirmishes. They send diplomatic letters filled with veiled threats. But they do not fight another major battle. Both sides remember Kadesh. Both sides remember the cost. And both sides begin to realize that they have more to gain from peace than from continued conflict. By 1259 BC, the geopolitical situation has shifted. New threats are emerging. The Assyrian Empire is growing stronger to the east, threatening Hittite territories. The Sea Peoples are raiding the coasts, threatening Egyptian security. Both empires face internal challenges: succession disputes, economic pressures, rebellious vassals. Fighting each other is a luxury neither can afford. Negotiations begin. Intermediaries travel between the Egyptian and Hittite courts, carrying proposals, counter-proposals, and carefully worded diplomatic language. Neither Ramesses nor Hattusili III, who has succeeded Muwatalli on the Hittite throne, ever meet in person, but through their diplomats, they hammer out an agreement. The result is the Egyptian-Hittite Peace Treaty, also known as the Eternal Treaty or the Silver Treaty. Modern historians often call it the Treaty of Kadesh, though the treaty text itself does not mention the battle. It is one of the oldest surviving peace treaties in the world, and the best-known ancient example with versions preserved from both sides, and we have copies of it from both sides. The Egyptian version carved on temple walls, the Hittite version preserved on clay tablets found in the ruins of Hattusa. The treaty establishes peace between the two empires, mutual defense against external threats, and procedures for handling refugees and extradition. It is a remarkable document, sophisticated in its language, comprehensive in its scope, and genuinely effective in its implementation. The treaty holds. Ramesses and Hattusili exchange letters addressing each other as brothers. They arrange marriages to cement the alliance. Ramesses eventually marries 2 Hittite princesses. Trade flows between the two empires. The border stabilizes. For the remaining decades of the 13th century BC, Egypt and Hatti are at peace. The Battle of Kadesh, fought to determine dominance, ultimately produced equality. And that equality produced peace. The treaty remains in force until the Hittite Empire collapses during the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC. For nearly 60 years, the agreement born from the stalemate at Kadesh keeps the peace between 2 superpowers. It is a testament to the idea that sometimes the most important outcome of a battle is not victory, but the wisdom to stop fighting. The world that produced the Battle of Kadesh does not last. Within a century of the battle, the entire Bronze Age civilization system collapses. The Hittite Empire falls, destroyed by invasions, internal rebellions, and economic crisis. The Mycenaean palaces of Greece burn. The cities of the Levant are abandoned. Trade routes collapse. Literacy declines. The great powers that dominated the late Bronze Age vanish. Egypt survives, but barely. Ramesses III, a later pharaoh of the 20th dynasty, fights desperate battles against the Sea Peoples, invasions of displaced populations fleeing their own collapsing civilizations. Egypt manages to repel them, but the effort exhausts the kingdom. The new kingdom gradually declines, losing its empire, fragmenting internally, entering a long period of weakness. The chariots that clashed at Kadesh become relics of a vanished age. Iron replaces bronze, cavalry replaces chariots. New powers, Assyria, Persia, Greece, Rome, rise to dominate the Near East. The great battle that Ramesses commemorated so obsessively is forgotten, its details lost, its details preserved mainly in propaganda inscriptions, later reconstructed by archaeologists. For thousands of years, Kadesh exists only as propaganda carved on Egyptian temple walls, grand claims in an ancient language that no one can read. Then, in the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists begin to uncover the truth. They find the Hittite capital at Hattusa. They find the clay tablets describing the battle from the Hittite perspective. They decipher the hieroglyphs and cuneiform scripts. They locate the ancient site of Kadesh. Slowly, painstakingly, they reconstruct what actually happened on that day in 1274 BC, when 5,000 chariots collided on the banks of the Orontes River. What they discover is a battle that, despite all the propaganda, despite all the exaggeration, despite all the self-serving claims, was genuinely epic. The largest chariot battle in history, a clash between 2 superpowers at the height of their strength. A moment when bronze met bronze, when empires collided, when the fate of the ancient world hung in the balance. And at the centre of it all, a young pharaoh who survived when he should have died, who fought when he should have surrendered, and who learned from his near destruction that some victories are not worth the cost of fighting. The dust has settled on the plains of Kadesh. The chariots are silent, the warriors are dust, but the echoes of that battle still resonate 3,000 years later. We remember it not because either side won, but because both sides survived. We remember it not because it resolved the conflict between Egypt and Hatti, but because it taught both empires that some conflicts cannot be resolved by force. We remember it because it produced not just slaughter, but eventually peace. Ramesses II lived for another 53 years after Kadesh. He ruled Egypt for 67 years, total one of the longest reigns in human history. He built monuments across Egypt, fathered over 100 children, and never stopped reminding anyone who would listen about his heroism at Kadesh. He turned his near disaster into his greatest propaganda triumph, and in a way he earned it. He faced annihilation and survived. He faced defeat and refused to accept it. He learned from his mistakes and made peace with his enemy. The Battle of Kadesh teaches us that warfare in the Bronze Age was sophisticated, brutal, and devastating. It teaches us that even 3,000 years ago, deception, intelligence, and psychological warfare were as important as bronze and muscle. It teaches us that empires can clash with all their might and still produce stalemate. And it teaches us that sometimes the greatest victory is recognizing when to stop fighting. Between 5,000 and 6,000 chariots in total, the largest known chariot engagement in history, dust, blood, and bronze under the Syrian sun. One young pharaoh surrounded and desperate, one cunning king who laid the perfect trap, and one battle that changed nothing and everything at the same time. This is the brutal truth of Kadesh. This is history. If you want to wear history, check out our exclusive Wars in History merch in the link below. We've got t-shirts, hoodies, and posters featuring the greatest battles ever fought. Every purchase supports the channel and helps us bring you more epic content like this. Represent your favourite battles in style, and if you loved this deep dive into Kadesh, let us know in the comments what battle we should cover next. Subscribe, and we'll see you on the next battlefield. Stay brutal, stay curious, and never forget the lessons written in dust and blood by those who came before us.